The mountain town of Keddie, California, sits nestled deep in the Sierra Nevada, a place where the air is thin and crisp, where towering pines cast long shadows across winding dirt roads, and where strangers are few and neighbors know each other's names. In 1981, it was home to a small resort community, a collection of modest cabins that housed working-class families trying to make ends meet in the economic uncertainty of early Reagan-era America. Life in Keddie was simple. Parents worked hard, children played in the woods, doors were left unlocked. It was the kind of place people moved to escape the chaos of the cities, to find peace in the mountains, to raise their families in safety. It was quiet, it was safe, it was home. Until the morning of April 12, 1981, when it became the site of one of the most brutal and perplexing unsolved murders in American history. A crime so savage, so inexplicable, that it would haunt this small community for more than 4 decades. Act 1, The Discovery. 14-year-old Sheila Sharp had spent the night of April 11th at a neighbor's house, just a short walk from her family's cabin. It was Easter weekend, and like most teenagers, she was enjoying a sleepover with friends, talking late into the night, looking forward to the holiday ahead. Her mother, Sue Sharp, was a single parent raising 5 children in Cabin 28, a small 2-bedroom unit at the Keddie Resort. Money was tight, but Sue was doing her best. She worked hard, loved her children fiercely, and was trying to build a new life after a difficult divorce. That Saturday night, Sue's 15-year-old son, John, had a friend staying over, Dana Wingate, a 17-year-old who was like family to the Sharps. The boys had settled in for the evening. Sue's younger sons, Rick and Greg, along with their friend Justin Smartt, were sleeping in one of the bedrooms. 12-year-old Tina was in her own bed. It seemed like an ordinary night. When Sheila walked back to Cabin 28 the next morning, she expected to find her family beginning their Easter Sunday. Maybe her mother would be making breakfast. Maybe her brothers would still be asleep. Instead, when she opened the door, she found a scene that would shatter her life forever. Blood everywhere. Her mother, Sue Sharp, lay dead on the floor of the living room. So did her brother John and his friend Dana. All 3 had been bound with medical and electrical tape. The violence inflicted upon them was beyond comprehension, a frenzied combination of stabbing, strangulation, and blunt force trauma delivered with both a knife and a hammer. Their bodies bore the marks of a sustained, brutal assault. This wasn't a quick killing. This was prolonged. This was rage. But perhaps the most haunting and inexplicable detail was this. In the bedroom directly adjacent to the living room, separated only by a thin wall, 3 young boys had somehow slept through it all. Sue's sons, Rick, age 10, and Greg, age 5, along with their 12-year-old friend Justin Smartt, were found alive and unharmed in the morning, still in their beds. How was that possible? How had they heard nothing? How had the killers left them untouched while committing such carnage just feet away? And there was one more terrible question. Where was 12-year-old Tina Sharp? Her bed was empty. She was gone. And in a crime scene already soaked in horror, her absence added another layer of dread. The possibility that somewhere out there, a child was being held, hurt, or worse.
Act 2. The investigation begins. The Plumas County Sheriff's Department had never seen anything like this. This was a small rural county where serious crime was rare. Deputies who normally dealt with traffic violations and petty theft were suddenly faced with what appeared to be a quadruple homicide. Personal, brutal, and terrifyingly close to home. The crime scene itself told a disturbing story. The living room was in disarray, signs of a struggle evident throughout. But there was something strange about the scene. Despite the obvious violence, certain elements seemed almost controlled. The younger children had been left unharmed. Specific items appeared to have been removed from the cabin, and the sheer brutality of the murders suggested this wasn't random. This was someone who knew the victims, someone with a reason to be there, someone consumed by rage. Tina's disappearance added urgency to the investigation. A missing 12-year-old girl meant this wasn't just a murder case, it was a potential abduction, a race against time. Every hour that passed reduced the chances of finding her alive. Investigators began interviewing neighbors, friends, anyone who might have seen or heard something that night. And quickly, suspicion began to focus on the people living in cabin 26, just 2 doors down from the Sharps. Martin Smartt lived there with his wife Marilyn and their children, including Justin, the boy who had inexplicably slept through the murders while staying with his friends in the next room. Smartt was known in the community as a volatile man with a drinking problem and a temper. Neighbors had heard him making disturbing, inappropriate comments about Sue Sharp. Some said he seemed obsessed with her. Others whispered about arguments, about tension between the families. And then there was Smart's house guest, John Bo Boubede, an ex-convict with a violent past who had been staying with the Smartt family. Boubede was an intimidating figure, large, aggressive, with a criminal record that included serious offenses. When investigators questioned both men, their stories seemed evasive, inconsistent, but there wasn't enough evidence to hold them. No physical evidence definitively linked them to the crime. No witnesses had seen them entering cabin 28. And so, incredibly, both Martin Smartt and Bo Boubede were allowed to leave Keddie within weeks of the murders. They packed up, they moved away, and they never came back. Meanwhile, the investigation began to falter. Evidence was collected but not properly processed. Leads were pursued half-heartedly, then abandoned. The crime scene photographs were filed away. The physical evidence, including potential DNA material that could have been tested even with 1981 technology, sat in evidence boxes, untouched. The community of Keddie watched in growing frustration as the case went cold, as the investigators seemed overwhelmed and justice slipped further and further away. Act 3. 3 years of silence. For 3 agonizing years, Tina Sharp remained a ghost, missing, possibly alive, possibly being held captive, possibly suffering in ways her family couldn't bear to imagine. Sue's surviving children were placed with relatives. Sheila carried the trauma of that morning's discovery like a weight that would never lift. The younger boys tried to rebuild their lives, tried to remember a time before that terrible night. And always there was the question of Tina. Had she been taken by the killers? Was she alive somewhere? Would she come home? The family held on to hope, but as the months turned into years, that hope began to feel like denial. Private investigators were hired. Psychics were consulted. Every possible lead was chased. But Tina remained missing, and the case remained unsolved. Then, in April 1984, 3 years to the month after the murders, 2 men discovered a small skull in the woods near Feather Falls, roughly 60 miles from Keddie. They were bottle collectors, searching the remote area for recyclables, when they stumbled upon the partial remains. It was Tina. The medical examiner determined that she had been killed shortly after her abduction, her remains left in the wilderness where they had lain undisturbed for 3 years. The discovery brought a grim closure to one question. Tina was gone, had been gone since that night, but it opened many others. Why had she been taken? Why had she been killed separately from the others? Who had transported her body 60 miles into the mountains? And why hadn't the investigation found her sooner? Especially given that an anonymous caller had contacted authorities in 1984 claiming to know where Tina's remains could be found. That call was recorded. The tape sat in evidence, but it was never properly investigated. The discovery of Tina's remains should have reignited the investigation, should have brought new urgency to finding her killers. Instead, it seemed to confirm what many had begun to fear, that the case would never be solved, that the killers had gotten away with it, that justice for the Sharp family would remain forever out of reach. Act 4. Decades of frustration. The years passed slowly in Keddie. The resort began to decline, families moved away, the cabins fell into disrepair, And Cabin 28, the site of so much horror, stood empty, a reminder of violence that everyone wanted to forget. Occasionally, the case would resurface, a newspaper would run an anniversary story, a true crime writer would investigate, local residents would share their theories in hushed conversations. But officially, the Keddie Cabin Murders were a cold case, filed away in boxes, forgotten by everyone except for those who had lived through it. In 2004, Cabin 28 was demolished. The structure was torn down, hauled away, erased from the landscape. It was as if the community hoped that removing the physical reminder might somehow diminish the memory, might allow the wounds to finally heal. But the questions remained, the pain remained, and the truth remained buried. For the Sharp family survivors, the decades brought no peace. Sheila struggled with the trauma, with survivor's guilt, with the frustration of watching her family's tragedy fade from public consciousness while the killers walked free. She knew who she believed was responsible. The whole community had their suspicions, but suspicion isn't evidence. And evidence, it seems, didn't matter when no one was willing to pursue it. Then in 2013, something changed. Greg Hagwood was elected sheriff of Plumas County. Unlike his predecessors, Hagwood was determined to confront the county's dark history, to re-examine the cases that had been abandoned, to seek justice even decades after the crimes. And at the top of his list was the Keddie Cabin Murders. He assigned the case to investigator Mike Gamberg, a man who had personal stakes in solving it. He had lived in Keddie as a child. He remembered the murders. He remembered the fear that had gripped the community. And he was determined to do what the original investigators had failed to do: find the truth. Act 6. Buried evidence. What Gamberg discovered when he began reviewing the case files was shocking, not just because of what was there, but because of what should have been done decades earlier. Evidence that should have been processed in 1981 sat untouched in storage. Photographs that should have been analyzed were still in their original envelopes. DNA samples that could have been tested even with older technology had never been sent to a lab. Witness statements that contained crucial information had been filed away and forgotten. It was a staggering failure of investigation, a betrayal of the victims that went beyond mere incompetence. It suggested something darker, indifference perhaps, or worse. Among the evidence Gamberg found was a letter written by Martin Smartt to his estranged wife Marilyn. In it, Smartt seemed to confess, writing that he had paid the price in the lives of 4 people. The letter was rambling, disturbed, filled with guilt and desperation. It had been in evidence since 1981, but no one had properly followed up on it. There was also the recording of the anonymous call about Tina's remains, a call that had provided specific information about the location where her body would be found. The caller had known details that only someone involved in the crime would know. The tape was logged into evidence, but the lead had never been pursued. And then there was the hammer. In 2016, during a search of a pond near the former site of Cabin 28, investigators discovered a hammer matching the description of the murder weapon, a hammer that Martin Smartt had reported missing shortly after the murders. It had been submerged for decades, but modern forensic techniques might still be able to extract DNA or other trace evidence from it. How had this evidence been overlooked for so long? How had the original investigators failed to search the immediate area around the crime scene? How had a confession letter, an incriminating phone call, and a murder weapon all been ignored? Gamberg also uncovered testimony from Smartt's former therapist, who reported that during counseling sessions in the 1980s, Smartt had essentially confessed to the murders. The therapist had felt bound by confidentiality at the time, but decades later felt compelled to come forward. Witnesses also reported seeing Smartt's truck near Cabin 28 on the night of the murders. Others recalled seeing Smartt and Boubede together in the days following the crime, agitated and nervous. The case against Martin Smartt and Bo Boubede seemed overwhelming, but both men were dead. Boubede had died in 1988, Smartt in 2000. They would never face trial. They would never be forced to account for what they had done. Act 6. More than 2.
But Gamberg and Hamwood weren't satisfied with simply identifying the likely killers. They believed, and the evidence suggested, that more than 2 people were involved in the crime. The logistics of the murders, the abduction of Tina, the transportation of her body 60 miles into the mountains, the cleanup of evidence, it all pointed to a larger conspiracy. Sheriff Hagwood stated publicly that he believed additional people had been involved, people who had helped dispose of evidence, people who had helped cover up the crime. And some of those people, he believed, were still alive. This is where the case stands today. Modern DNA analysis continues on the evidence that was finally, belatedly collected. Witnesses continue to come forward with fragments of information, pieces of a puzzle that might never be complete. And investigators continue to believe that someone out there, someone who has kept quiet for more than 40 years, knows what really happened that night. Who else was in Cabin 28? Who helped move Tina's body? Who made that anonymous phone call? And why, after all these years, has no one broken their silence? Act 7, The Survivors. Sheila Sharp has spent her entire adult life living with the memory of what she saw that morning in April 1981. The trauma of losing her mother and brother, the horror of that discovery, the guilt of surviving when they didn't. It's a burden that time hasn't lessened. She has spoken publicly about the case, has advocated for justice, has fought to keep her family's story alive. She has also had to live with the knowledge that the men she believes killed her family died without ever being held accountable, without ever admitting what they did, without ever giving her the closure she desperately needs. The 3 boys who slept through the murders have carried their own burdens. For Rick and Greg Sharp, the younger brothers who lost their mother and siblings, the trauma has been compounded by the impossible question, how did we not wake up? How did we sleep through our family being murdered feet away from us? And for Justin Smartt, whose father was the prime suspect, the burden is perhaps heaviest of all. How do you reconcile the possibility that your own father was capable of such horror? How do you live with the knowledge that while you slept safely in your friend's room, your father may have been in the next room committing murder? For the people of Keddie, the case represents something larger than one unsolved crime. It represents a failure of the justice system, a betrayal of public trust, and a wound in the community that has never healed. The resort is long gone. The cabins have been torn down. Most of the people who lived there in 1981 have moved away. But the memory remains, and the demand for justice remains. Closing. Today, more than 40 years after that terrible Easter weekend, the Keddie Cabin Murders remain officially unsolved. The case file stays open. DNA evidence continues to be analyzed using techniques that didn't exist in 1981. Witnesses continue to come forward, sometimes with information they've kept secret for decades, out of fear or loyalty or shame. Sheriff Hagwood and investigator Gamberg believe they know who committed these murders. They believe they understand the motive. They believe additional people were involved, but belief isn't proof. And without living suspects to charge, without witnesses willing to testify, without that final piece of evidence that turns theory into certainty, the case remains in limbo. The mountains of Keddie are quiet now. The resort that once housed working-class families trying to build better lives is gone, replaced by different development, different dreams. The spot where Cabin 28 stood is empty ground, indistinguishable from the forest around it, but the ghosts remain. Sue Sharp, who worked so hard to give her children a better life, who died trying to protect them. John Sharp and Dana Wingate, teenage boys whose lives were stolen before they had truly begun. And Tina Sharp, 12 years old, taken from her bed, killed and discarded in the woods, her childhood ended in the worst way imaginable. They wait for justice. They wait for truth. They wait for someone to finally break their silence and speak the words that will bring this decades-long nightmare to a close. If you lived in Keddie in 1981, if you knew Martin Smartt or Bo Boubede, if you saw something or heard something or know something that you've kept quiet all these years, now is the time. The people who committed these crimes may be dead, but the truth isn't. The survivors deserve answers.
The victims deserve justice, and Keddie deserves to finally heal.